pivot here to the great state of Texas. I think by the time this airs, I believe that Texas will be in the SEC. I'm not sure when this is airing exactly, but I think they'll be in the SEC. We know they're going to be in the SEC this year. A&M and Texas, that rivalry is back. You have been very vocal, and you've been on the Paul Feinbaum show, so people, if his face looks familiar because he's on national TV, you said, hey, I think A&M is going to be superior to Texas in 2024. Am I off base there? Do we still feel that way? And if we do feel that way, why are we taking that stance on A&M this year versus Texas?
Well, like you said, I said it on national television. I can't go back on it now, but that's where I'm at. I sometimes like to say things that are some would call it outlandish, I guess you'd say, but I just look at things a little bit differently, I guess. But I mean, I still feel that way. And again, I think A&M's going to be much better than people anticipate. We got rid of Jimbo. Thank goodness. We got us a qualified adult down there to run A&M's football program, and Mike Elko. I think that's a huge addition by subtraction. I don't care what we had to pay Jimbo. He was worth 2 or 3 buyouts to get him away from this football program. So that's a big reason. And, Colin Klein hiring him as offensive coordinator, and the fact that he played at Kansas State, was very successful at Kansas State, yet he left there to come to A&M. I think that should give you an indication of his belief in what they can build down there. And they're talking championships now down there, not trying to win 9-10 games. They're talking championships. Now, are they going to be playoff bound year one? I wouldn't go quite that far, but really, I think the fact that game, Texas at Texas A&M, it's in College Station, I think that'll be the difference. I'm not sitting here saying Texas is going to be awful or anything, but I think people just get enamored. But I don't get it with Texas. I think it's because of Sarkisian. I think it's because of Ewers. And again, they're fine. Sarkisian, one of the best play callers in the game. But it wasn't Texas offense that was leading the way last year. It was the defense. They had a much better defense than they had offense. Quinn Ewers has been inconsistent. He's been injured. Again, I'm not trying to throw him under the bus or anything, but all the Heisman hype makes no sense based on what he's actually done on the field. And, oh, by the way, JD, they return the fewest returning receiving production of anybody in the SEC. So you're asking a quarterback that has not lit the world on fire to essentially have all new receivers and new running backs, at least starting running backs. I know the running backs were there, but all the receivers are basically transfers that are playing for Texas this year. I just think week in and week out in the SEC, it's going to be a little bit of a different story than it was in the Big 12, which, they won it like once out of the last 12 years, something crazy like that. So, no, Texas is not going to come into this conference and dominate it day one. For all those do you need any more reasons than that?
No, man. Hey, I got a nice little list here from you. I'm taking. I got it all set. But I love it. I love you bringing the juice, man. Calling your shot. I'm all about it. Like this is what it's about. It'd be boring if we all had the same opinion. I am full transparency. I'm high on Texas. I like Quinn Ewers. If he can stay healthy, we'll see what happens. But I want to backtrack a little bit to what you said about Jimbo Fisher because it jogged my memory. Again, subscribe to SEC Mike on follow him on Twitter, but subscribe to that SEC podcast on YouTube and on the podcast platforms. If for no other reason, my man, if you haven't already been able to tell, one of the most entertaining in the game. I have vivid memories. Sunday morning, we're in here doing our thing, talking about the day that was, and the news breaks Jimbo Fisher out at A&M. And so I kind of go on the Twitter sphere and I'm seeing, okay, how real is this? What are the details? And I come across y'all's live stream, and my man on a Sunday morning is cracking open a cold one and saying, hey, never too early to celebrate some good news. And just having himself, it was probably like, 9:30 a.m., give or take, here in Nashville. And you were like, hey, it's cause for celebration. And my man went to Tennessee, so it would be in your best interest for A&M to actually have kept a head coach that you don't believe in. And so that story, though, in itself, I thought had to be told during this segment. But, I mean, A&M is so interesting because I think a lot of people hear about what they want to accomplish. They hear about the aspirations, and they hear A&M say, hey, can we win the SEC, can we make the college football playoff, all those things. And they kind of scoff at it based on what they haven't done. And my whole thing with them, Mike, is if you're A&M, you keep being told in college football input equates to output. And I think A&M has had tremendous input, even with their lack of structure in my mind, from what Jimbo Fisher was able to accomplish on the football field. They still acquired some really good talent. Like Connor Wegman is still, I think, one of the more talented quarterbacks in that conference. Now, does that translate? We'll see. But you're telling me we got to recruit well, got to get a quarterback, got to put money into this program, and if we do that, we'll win. And they've done those things. So I think it's about time for someone to be able to maximize, and I hope Mike Elko is that guy. But, man, that reaction from you on Jimbo Fisher, man, when he got let go, it was iconic. It was iconic in every sense.
Yeah, I always know a coach is really in trouble, JD, when, for 2-3 years I was bagging on the guy, trolling him, which I thought was deserved based on the potential of his roster and everything and what he didn't do with it. And, the fans, they just say, oh, you hate us, you don't like our culture, yada, yada, yada. The same thing I'm getting from Auburn people and Texas people now, and I basically got from everybody in the conference. But last fall, A&M, all the people that were bagging on me said, this guy's right. And that's when I really know a coach is in trouble, when they start to agree with me. But, yeah, I mean, what a joke. And, again, when you get all this hundreds of millions of dollars, a position I'll never be in, I don't know what that does to a person's psyche. But I think some people, it shuts them down. I think they stop trying. What they're more worried about is calling out Nick Saban in a press conference. And I mean, again, you just go back and watch A&M the last 2 or 3 years. They essentially were coached well against Alabama because Jimbo hates Saban, and then they lose the next week to Mississippi State. And that's not to be disrespectful to Mississippi State, but you can't go toe-to-toe with Alabama and even beat them on the field and then go lose to Mississippi State, lose to Auburn. Lane Kiffin's in your head. You can't touch him either. I mean, it's just a disaster. At least it has been. Now the talent's still there. Like you said, I'm glad you brought up Connor Wigman. I think he is one quarterback that very few people around the SEC are really talking about when we're talking the best quarterbacks potentially. And keep in mind, he did this in Jimbo's 2014 offense. That was archaic. Now we've got a guy in Colin Klein that runs a 2024 offense. So I'm just fascinated to see what he looks like. I thought he looked like a Heisman contender early last season. If we could keep him healthy, which that's a big if, because sure. A&M's quarterbacks have been getting banged up. Seemingly, I can't even remember, JD, the last time they had a starting quarterback that I guess it was Kellen Mond in the COVID year that didn't get hurt. Yeah. But every other year that they've had someone get hurt. Getting rid of the offensive line coach, that was another addition by subtraction. Steve Adazio, he's got no place in major college football, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the game itself is going to be incredible. The fact that we get that rivalry back the last week of the regular season, that's, I think, one of what I would call a gift of realignment, because realignment's tugging that tradition and it's changing rivalries. Like realignment in a roundabout way, not roundabout, it directly gave us A&M and Texas back, which is going to be raucous. That game too, I think it's worth just sort of prefacing a little bit, like whatever we think we know about that game, when that ball gets kicked off in Kyle Field, I say this, in rivalry games, period, but especially in this one, like we need to just delete logic from the formula when we try and break that game down, because it just screams something weird happening to me, especially if there's something at stake for A&M to try and, backdoor their way to a 10th win or whatever it ends up being for them. Like there's going to be a lot at stake emotionally and from a pride perspective, but if there's something at stake when it comes to what happens on the field for A&M or Texas to get into the college football playoff, like that's going to be cinematic, Mike.
Yeah, well, speaking of cinematic, I was just thinking, I could see McConaughey running out on the field to block a game-winning field goal or something crazy. I don't know if you read it. You said it was something wild. I don't know if you're going to go that far, but, I mean, emotions are going to be at an all-time high. There's going to be a lot on the line for both programs, but particularly A&M getting to host that game. They hosted the last version. They lost it at last-second field goal. So, man, that right there is the game I have. They could both be 0-11. I still want to watch that game more than anything. But realistically, I think both of them are going to be playing for the right to go to the college football playoff, and I like A&M to win it.
That's going to be fun, man. That's going to be fun. One more thing before we move on here. I guess two more things. I think that in this game, we've seen in big rivalries, specifically Michigan and Ohio State, there is a prerequisite to being the coach at either of those schools that you have to beat your rival consistently, or you can't lose too many in a row, essentially. And we're seeing that now with Ryan Day. He goes 11-1, and he's lost to Michigan now 3 times in a row, and people are like, is he the right guy? When in reality, he's won north of 87% of his games. Do you think we're hurtling towards a situation here with A&M and Texas if they become national powers, and Texas is right now, we'll see if A&M can get there, where that sort of framework can be applied to the head coach? Like, hey, we go 11-1, but we lose to A&M too many times in a row. We're going to have some problems?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you a perfect example, JD. I mean, are there any Texas fans that are upset with Sarkisian right now? I think the answer is no. What's his record against Oklahoma, who they claim is their biggest rival?
Sure.
I believe he's got a losing record. I believe he's 1-2 against Oklahoma.
Yep.
So is that defining him? No. But if he loses to A&M and he misses the college football playoff, clearly they're not going to fire him or anything. But there's going to be some tough – if he loses to A&M this year on the road and then he loses to A&M at home the following year, they might be crazy enough to fire him. I'll put it that way.
Golly. Can you imagine? I mean, that Sunday morning, if that ends up happening, will be – I'll be bonkers. That'll be absolutely bonkers. Second of the 2 things to get to here before we move on, I feel like if if Texas takes care of business against A&M and they make the college football playoff and they finish around the top 3 of the SEC, to me that would validate Sark a lot, and I think it would validate last season a lot and all the success they had on the field. In your mind, what would make you a believer in Texas and a believer in Sark for what they could accomplish this upcoming season?
I want to see him beat Georgia. And I know that game's at home, but I think that's critical to see how they handle that. Just, the week in, week out grind in the SEC it's just different than the Big 12. And people roll their eyes at it, but it's true. And perfect example, they play teams like Kentucky and Florida and Mississippi State this year. Now, Mississippi State, they should kill. And that's because Mississippi State's in year 1. But if this was a normal Mike Leach or Dan Mullen Mississippi State, that's not a gimme either. But it's those games like Kentucky, like Florida, that could come and get you. Though I see them losing a game like that this year. In addition to A&M, in addition to possibly Oklahoma, I think certainly Georgia they'll lose as well. So you start to see where, again, I'm not saying they're going to be terrible. I think it'll be about 9-3, but they're going to drop a game probably, maybe 2, that people just automatically chalk up to an automatic win. But it doesn't happen in this conference. And the only ones that have avoided that seemingly is Nick Saban. He's the greatest coach of all time, and Kirby Smart, who, as Lane Kiffin says, he's got 25 5-stars over there. He's got no business losing any of these games. Everyone else that's ever coached in this conference loses games like that, and seemingly on an annual basis.
As our friend of the show, Jake Crane, would say, it's not always the big ones, it's the landmines in between on the schedule that make it a little bit complex. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.